The city still slept when the first knock came. It wasn't loud, just a firm, deliberate sound that echoed through the quiet apartment like a pulse breaking the silence. Clara Hayes stirred, half asleep beneath her linen sheets, her body tangled in warmth, her mind still drifting between dream and daylight. She blinked into the dark, disoriented. The clock on her bedside table glowed in soft blue digits, 5:03 a.m. Another knock. 3 quick raps, not hesitant urgent. She sat up, heart quickening. No one ever came at this hour, not in her world of planned schedules and polite boundaries. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it, the stress talking again, the nightmares she'd been having about missing deadlines or losing clients. But then it came once more, harder this time, followed by a voice. "Clara, please, open the door." It was a man's voice, deep, strained, with an edge of something she couldn't name. Fear? Desperation? Clara slipped out of bed, her bare feet brushing the cool wood floor. The Seattle rain tapped faintly against the windows, a sound she usually found comforting, but tonight it felt ominous, like a warning. She hesitated, glanced toward the door, then at the mirror on the wall. Her hair was a mess, her silk camisole wrinkled. She wrapped a robe around herself and padded quietly to the entryway. Through the peephole, she saw a man standing under the dim hallway light. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair disheveled, a week-old stubble shadowing his jaw. His gray t-shirt clung damply to his shoulders, rain soaking through. It took her a second to place him. The new neighbor, apartment 804, Oliver Reed. They'd exchanged only a few polite nods in the elevator before never more than a hello. He'd moved in 2 weeks ago, quiet but observant. She remembered his eyes, gray, almost colorless, like the sky before a storm. Now those same eyes stared straight into the peephole, wide with urgency. "Clara," he said again, his voice muffled through the door. "Don't go to work today, please." Her hand froze on the knob. "What?" she managed. "What are you talking about? Just trust me. Stay home. Call in sick, whatever you have to do, but don't leave this building today." Something in his tone was raw, pleading, but it also terrified her. She'd seen that kind of intensity once before, in her husband Ethan, when he was trying to talk her out of signing a contract she didn't understand. That same insistence, that same quiet command wrapped in care. She unlocked the door, only halfway, the chain still on. Oliver's face was clearer now. He looked exhausted, dark circles bruising his eyes, rain dripping from his hair onto his collar. There was a faint cut near his temple, a smudge of dirt on his cheek as if he'd been somewhere he shouldn't have been. "Is everything all right?" she asked cautiously. He shook his head. "No, but it will be, if you listen to me." Her breath fogged in the cold, air seeping through the gap. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" He hesitated, eyes flicking down the hall, then back to her. "I can't explain right now. Just promise me you won't go to work today, not until I come back." "I don't even know you," she said, her voice tightening. "You show up at my door before sunrise, looking like this, and tell me what to do? This is insane." Oliver stepped back slightly, his expression softening, but the desperation remained. "I know how it sounds, but please, Clara, just this once." Her pulse raced. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her want to listen, even as her rational mind screamed otherwise. His voice carried an honesty she couldn't quite ignore, yet everything about the moment felt wrong. "Go home, Mr. Reed," she said quietly. "Get some rest." He opened his mouth to speak, but she closed the door before he could. The soft click of the lock echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, Clara leaned her forehead against the wood, her breath uneven. The faint scent of rain lingered in the air. Then she exhaled, shaking her head, forcing herself to laugh. "Seattle men," she muttered. Unbelievable. She made tea, tried to calm herself. The digital clock on the counter blinked 5:26. Outside, dawn was beginning to stir, bleeding gray light through the blinds. She tried to shake off the unease, telling herself it was nothing, just a strange man, maybe unwell, maybe drunk, maybe both. Still, her hands trembled as she reached for her mug. Her phone buzzed a calendar reminder. 8:30 a.m. design pitch with Morgan & Stratton Holdings, the biggest client of the quarter. Ethan had insisted she take it alone this time, said it was her chance to prove she could stand on her own. She smiled faintly at the thought of him, her husband, always pushing her, always distant. They'd barely spoken the night before. He'd left late, saying he had calls to make. She didn't ask what kind. She'd stopped asking months ago. The memory of Oliver's voice haunted her, threading through the sound of rain. Don't go to work today. By 7, the city was fully awake. Traffic murmured below, a gray mist rising over the streets. Clara dressed carefully, a navy suit, white blouse, subtle gold earrings. She wanted normalcy, control. Whatever that man's warning was, it didn't belong in her day. She was locking the apartment when she noticed something tucked beneath her doormat. A folded piece of paper, soaked at the edges. Her name was written across it in hurried, uneven strokes. She unfolded it, heart skipping. Inside, just 4 words. He knows. Stay home. No signature, no explanation. The hallway seemed to close in around her, the hum of the elevator distant and hollow. For a long time, she just stood there, the paper trembling in her fingers, her pulse thudding like the first knock that had woken her. She almost turned back. Almost. But habit, pride, and disbelief are powerful things. Clara Hayes straightened her shoulders, slipped the note into her purse, and stepped into the elevator. By the time the doors closed, she had already decided to ignore it. By noon, she would understand how that single choice, turning away from a stranger's warning, would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, marriage, and truth. The morning unfolded like any other deceptively ordinary, almost tender in its routine calm. Clara arrived at her office downtown just after 8, rain still slick on her coat and hair. The sky above Seattle was a smudged watercolor of gray, the kind that pressed low and heavy, promising more rain. She greeted the receptionist, exchanged polite smiles, and set her purse down by her desk in the corner office she'd worked years to earn. On her computer, the wallpaper was a photo from last summer. Her and Ethan at Lake Chelan, sunglasses, sunburned noses, smiling like 2 people who had never once doubted the future. Looking at it now, the image felt like something from a stranger's life. She began reviewing her pitch for Morgan & Stratton Holdings, scrolling through the slides she had rehearsed a dozen times. Ethan had gone over them with her 2 nights ago, or at least he'd pretended to. His mind had been elsewhere, his phone buzzing constantly, his answers mechanical. She'd ignored it, telling herself it was business, as always. That was Ethan. Ambitious, restless, a man always chasing one more deal. At 9:12, her assistant knocked. "Clara, there's something you should see." The girl's voice was uncertain, and Clara frowned. "What is it?" "On the news." Clara followed her into the break room. The television above the coffee machine flickered with the morning broadcast, the sound low but unmistakable. She saw the headline before she heard the words. Prominent Seattle investor Ethan Hayes arrested for corporate fraud and embezzlement. The image that followed knocked the air from her lungs. Ethan in handcuffs, surrounded by flashing cameras, his expression tense, his usually perfect hair disheveled. The reporter's voice droned over the footage. Hayes allegedly funneled client funds through a shell company registered under his wife's business name, Hayes Design Group. Her business name. Her company. Someone gasped behind her. Clara didn't move. The coffee machine gurgled quietly, the hum of the office a distant blur. She watched as the camera panned to the police car door closing, Ethan's face vanishing behind tinted glass. Her heart stuttered once, twice, then began to race uncontrollably. "No," she whispered. There must be a mistake." But the newscaster went on, listing names, figures, companies, accounts. Her company was mentioned again. Investigators say funds were laundered through legitimate design contracts under the Hayes Design Group, owned by Clara Hayes. Her knees went weak. She gripped the counter to steady herself. A few coworkers exchanged uneasy glances, whispering. She felt their eyes, the pity, the curiosity, the quiet judgment that spreads faster than smoke. She turned and walked out without a word. In her office, the air felt thinner, colder. She shut the door and stood by the window, staring down at the street far below. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, pale, stunned, unraveling. The phone began ringing, then another. Her cell vibrated on the desk texts, calls, email alerts, all flooding in at once. She sat down, her hands trembling as she opened her inbox. Subject: urgent media inquiry. Subject: statement regarding Ethan Hayes' investigation. Subject: we need to talk. Rebecca, attorney. Her scrolling slowed. Dozens of messages, all within minutes. Reporters, colleagues, even friends all demanding something. A comment, an explanation, reassurance that she wasn't part of it. There was one message from Ethan, sent at 7:42 a.m. "I'm sorry. Don't come to the office. Please trust me." Her throat closed. The same warning. The same words Oliver had used. She read it again and again, as if repetition could alter its meaning. Outside her door, whispers gathered. Through the frosted glass, she saw blurred shapes, people hesitating to knock. The world she'd built brick by careful brick over a decade of early mornings and long nights was beginning to crack. By 10, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Clients were pulling contracts, her assistant in tears. A lawyer from the firm called, voice low and strained, advising her not to speak to anyone. "Clara, listen to me. They're investigating your accounts. They think you might have known." "Known what?" she asked, her voice brittle. "That Ethan was using your business as a cover. The money trail points straight to your company records." She laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You think I'd risk everything for that? For him?" But even as she said it, her mind began replaying moments, small, easily dismissed things. Ethan asking for her signature on a routine financial form, his insistence on handling their joint tax filings, the expensive gifts, the sudden trips, the way he'd avoid eye contact when she asked where the money was coming from. It all clicked into place with the precision of a cruel machine. At 11, she couldn't take it anymore. She left the building through the side exit, umbrella forgotten. Rain fell in cold sheets, soaking her suit as she walked aimlessly down the street. People passed her, their faces buried in phones, oblivious. She wanted to scream at them, to tell them her life had just shattered, but the words stuck somewhere deep in her chest. She found herself at a small cafe near the pier, one she and Ethan used to visit on Sundays. She sank into a corner booth, trembling, and ordered tea. The waitress recognized her from before, hesitated, then smiled awkwardly. That small human gesture nearly undid her. The television above the counter replayed the same footage of Ethan, the same headline. This time, she didn't look away. She studied his face. The man she'd loved, defended, built a life with, and wondered how many versions of him had existed. The charming one who bought her flowers. The calculating one who moved numbers she never understood. The liar who whispered, "Trust me," right before betraying her. The tea went cold. Her phone buzzed again, relentless. She ignored it until a new message appeared from an unknown number. "Clara, it's Oliver. I need to see you. Don't go home yet." She froze. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too bright. She didn't know what scared her more, that Oliver knew what was happening, or that maybe, somehow, he had tried to save her from it. Her hands shook as she typed back, "How did you know?" No answer came. By noon, the rain had turned into a downpour, drumming hard against the windows. Clara stared out at the blurred city beyond, a world she no longer recognized. Her reflection stared back, drenched, haunted, hollow-eyed. She realized with a sudden, aching clarity that her marriage wasn't just broken. It had been an illusion all along. Every dinner, every anniversary, every whispered "I love you" had been part of a script written by someone else, someone who'd never intended to stay. Her phone buzzed again. Another headline notification blinked across the screen. Ethan Hayes' wife under federal review. And just like that, the final piece of her old life fell away. Clara closed her eyes, letting the world blur into sound and rain. Somewhere beyond the storm, she imagined Oliver's voice again, soft, urgent, echoing from the morning. "Don't go to work today." She finally understood why. Rain still lingered over the city, the kind that soaked through your coat no matter how fast you walked. Clara stood at her apartment window, wrapped in a blanket, watching streaks of gray blur the skyline. Her body was exhausted, her mind replaying the same loop: Ethan in handcuffs, her name on the news, the cold stares at the office. Every few minutes, her phone lit up with messages she refused to read. Reporters wanted statements. Friends wanted explanations. No one wanted the truth, only her version of it. She hadn't slept. The hours since the arrest felt stretched and distorted, like living underwater. She hadn't cried either, not because she wasn't broken, but because the shock had frozen something deep inside her. A knock startled her. It wasn't loud, but distinct. That same rhythm from before. 3 measured knocks. For a moment she stood still, heart thudding in her chest. Then she moved toward the door, hesitating only once before unlocking it. Oliver Reed stood in the hallway, damp from the rain again, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a folded envelope. His eyes met hers, steady, remorseful, searching. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, gripping the edge of the door. "I know," his voice was low, almost apologetic, "but I couldn't let you find out from someone else." "Find out what?" He didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, holding the envelope out to her. "This is everything I've been working on. The reason I knew." Clara didn't move to take it. "Working on?" she repeated, her tone sharpening. "What are you talking about, Oliver?" He exhaled, rain dripping from his hair onto his collar. "I'm an investigative journalist. I've been following your husband's company for months. The fraud, the shell accounts, the missing investors, it all led back to him." She stared at him as if the words themselves were foreign. "You followed him? You knew?" "I knew he was dirty. I didn't know about you." His voice broke slightly at the end, like he was pleading for her to understand. "When I realized your name was tied to one of his shell companies, I thought you were involved. But the more I dug, the clearer it became you weren't part of it. You were collateral." Clara's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Collateral," she repeated bitterly. "That's what I was? To both of you?" He flinched. "Clara, I tried to warn you." "Warn me?" Her voice rose, trembling with anger. "You showed up at my door before sunrise, said something cryptic, and disappeared. You knew my husband was about to be arrested and thought a vague warning was enough? Do you have any idea what my life looks like now?" Oliver's jaw tightened. "If I'd told you outright, you might have gone straight to him. You could have been pulled into the investigation, or worse, I was trying to protect you. She laughed, a sound sharp and hollow. Protect me? You exposed him. You destroyed everything, and you're standing here telling me you did it for me? He looked at her for a long time, silent, as if weighing every word. I didn't destroy your marriage, Clara. I uncovered what was already rotten. Her throat constricted. She wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to make him feel the chaos she'd been drowning in since that morning. But instead, her voice cracked, softer this time. You should have told me the truth. I wanted to, he said, stepping closer. His voice was raw now, stripped of pretense. But if I told you before the arrest, I would have compromised the story, and I couldn't prove your innocence yet. I didn't want you dragged into it. She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, his shoulders tense, his face lined with guilt. He wasn't the calm stranger from the elevator anymore. He looked like someone who had carried too many secrets for too long. And now? She asked quietly. What do you want from me now? Nothing, he said, almost whispering. I just needed you to know I'm not your enemy. Her silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. The only sound was the rain sliding down the windows behind her. Finally, she took the envelope from his hand. The paper was damp, the edges curled. Inside were printed documents, photographs, transaction records, proof of everything Ethan had done. She scanned the pages, her stomach twisting tighter with every line. The dates matched her business invoices, her company's letterhead, Ethan's signature in places hers should have been. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. He forged me, she whispered. Oliver nodded slowly. Every paper trail I found pointed back to him. He used you, Clara. He used your reputation to make his crimes look legitimate. Her vision blurred. For the first time since the arrest, tears came silent, unstoppable. She turned away, not wanting him to see her break. But he stepped forward instinctively, reaching out before stopping himself halfway. His hand hovered in the air, inches from her shoulder. Don't, she said, her voice shaking. Just don't. He lowered his hand, his face etched with something that looked like regret. I know you don't trust me. I don't expect you to, but I couldn't stand watching you get destroyed for something you didn't do. Clara looked at him through the haze of tears. You've already watched me be destroyed, she said quietly. You just came to witness the aftermath. Oliver's eyes flickered with pain. That's not true. Then what is true, Oliver? That you were chasing a story? That you used me for information without ever asking who I was? I stopped chasing the story the morning I met you, he said simply. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to dismiss it, to call it another manipulation, but there was something in his voice, something stripped bare, that made her pause. You think saying that makes any of this better? She whispered. No, he admitted. It just makes it harder. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, a long, low rumble that vibrated through the walls. The light flickered once, the rain intensifying. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Clara finally drew in a deep breath, folding the papers back into the envelope. I don't know what to do with any of this, she said softly. Start by telling the truth, he said, to the investigators, to yourself. And then what? Then, he hesitated, you survive it. She turned her face away, but his words sank deep, like something she'd been waiting to hear. When she looked back, he was already stepping away, the hallway dim behind him. I'll be in touch, he said quietly, only if you want me to. The door clicked shut, and Clara was alone again with the sound of rain, the weight of truth in her hands, and a hollow ache where certainty used to live. For a long time, she stood there in silence, staring at the closed door, realizing that the stranger who had shattered her life might also be the only one who'd tried to save it. For days, Clara's apartment became her entire world, a high-rise cocoon of silence suspended above a city that refused to stop whispering her name. The media storm had grown wild and merciless. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests, her phone buzzed with unfamiliar numbers, and her face, her stunned, pale face, appeared on morning talk shows and gossip sites. They called her the wife who didn't know, the woman behind the scandal, the enigma in designer heels. Every headline carved a new wound, each word a reminder that her privacy, her dignity, and her career had all become public property. Outside her window, Seattle was a patchwork of mist and headlights, the rain slicing the city into soft streaks of gray and gold. It should have been beautiful. It used to be beautiful. But now, the world below looked cold and sharp, like shards of glass waiting for her to fall. She didn't go out anymore. Not to work, not even for groceries. A friend had offered to help, then stopped calling after the second day, too afraid, perhaps, of being seen with her. Clara didn't blame anyone. She had been part of a perfect picture once, too, and she knew how fast people erased imperfections to protect their own reflection. The only person who still came was Oliver. It started with a text. You should turn off your phone's location services. They're tracking reporters through social media check-ins. Then a call. Don't answer the number ending in 003. That's the station producer pretending to be your lawyer. He was cautious, never pushy. At first, she ignored him, ashamed that she needed help from the man who had exposed the truth. But by the third day, exhaustion won. She answered. Now, he came by quietly, always at night, never announced. He brought food she barely touched, printed statements from her attorney, and updates on the investigation she didn't want to hear. Yet somehow, his presence eased the suffocating quiet. That evening, rain pattered softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Clara sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, wearing an old sweater and staring at the muted TV. Oliver was at the dining table, typing something on his laptop. The light from the screen cast a soft glow on his face, catching the faint lines around his eyes. "You should eat," he said without looking up. "I'm not hungry." He glanced at her, one brow lifting. "You haven't been hungry for 3 days." She looked away. "Maybe I'm not built for appetite anymore." He shut the laptop gently and stood, crossing the room. His footsteps were soft against the hardwood floor. When he stopped beside her, she caught the faint scent of rain and coffee clinging to his jacket. "You don't have to disappear because of what he did," he said. She gave a tired laugh. "That's easy to say when it's not your face plastered across every news site." He hesitated, then lowered himself onto the couch beside her. Not too close, but close enough for her to feel his warmth. "It's not your fault, Clara." "Isn't it?" she murmured. "I didn't see it. I didn't ask. I just let him use my name, my business, my signature. Maybe I wanted to believe in him so badly I stopped believing in myself." Oliver studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "You believed in the version of him you were shown. That's not blindness, that's trust. And trust isn't a weakness." She turned her head toward him. "You sound like someone who's trying to convince himself of that." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe I am." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain. The city lights shimmered through the glass, reflections trembling across the walls. Clara's gaze drifted to the window, her own distorted reflection staring back. "I used to love this apartment," she said softly. "It felt open, full of light. Now it feels like a cage, like everyone can see in, but I can't see out. Oliver followed her gaze. It's not a cage, he said. It's a house of glass. Fragile, yes, but it also lets the light in. You just have to remember to look at it from the inside. She let out a slow breath, the words lingering between them. There was something about his calm that steadied her, a quietness that felt earned, like he'd seen enough of the world to understand its cruelty. Later, when the clock touched midnight, he stood to leave. I'll check in tomorrow, he said. She rose too, walking him to the door. For a moment, neither of them moved. The hallway light spilled in, outlining his figure against the rain-blurred night. Oliver, she said, her voice almost a whisper, why do you keep helping me? He met her gaze. Because no one helped me when my life fell apart. Something in his tone, soft, broken, edged with memory, made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the look in his eyes told her not to. When he was gone, the apartment felt emptier than before. She stood by the door, listening to the fading sound of his footsteps, and wondered why the quiet felt lonelier now that she knew someone cared. Over the next few nights, his visits became a pattern. He'd bring takeout or coffee, sometimes documents from the lawyer, sometimes nothing at all. They'd sit in silence, two people bound by shared ruin. She learned little things about him, that he couldn't sleep when it rained, that he used to play guitar before journalism swallowed his time, that he'd lost someone, once a wife, perhaps, but he never said her name. And Clara, despite herself, began to talk too. Not much at first, just fragments of thought, stories about her childhood, her first design project, her love of old architecture. He listened the way few people ever had, not to respond, but to understand. One night, when the rain fell heavier than usual, the power flickered out. The apartment plunged into darkness, except for the faint glow from the street below. Oliver lit a candle. Its warm light softened the hard lines of his face, casting shadows that danced across the glass walls. Looks better this way, she said quietly, without all the noise. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the candle flame. Sometimes silence tells the truth better than words. Their eyes met. The air between them felt different, charged, fragile, dangerous. Clara's breath caught. For a fleeting second, she wondered what would happen if she let herself lean toward him, if she allowed the quiet to become something else entirely. But she didn't move. Neither did he. The moment lingered, suspended between guilt and longing, and then passed like a sigh that never found its voice. When she finally went to bed that night, the candle still flickered on the table, its reflection trembling in the glass. And for the first time in weeks, Clara slept not peacefully, but deeply, as if her mind had finally surrendered to the fragile safety of the man who had once been a stranger. The storm outside had dulled to a mist, the kind that hung in the air long after the thunder had gone. Clara sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen, a blank email draft open like an accusation. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, any more answers, closure, or simply the courage to face what remained of her life. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains, pale and uncertain. Her reflection in the black laptop screen was barely recognizable. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a careless knot, lips pressed tight from too many nights of silence. When she finally opened Ethan's old folders, the smell of him seemed to return, his cologne lingering in memory, the echo of his laugh, the way he used to call her darling when he wanted to distract her from asking too many questions. But the files told a different story. At first, they were harmless. Spreadsheets, invoices, design blueprints for projects she'd once proudly presented. Then the tone changed. Hidden between folders were drafts of fake contracts, letters forged with her signature, and private messages to investors using her name as a shield. Her name, her company, her reputation, all of it weaponized by the man who had once promised to protect her. As she scrolled deeper, she found something worse: emails between Ethan and another woman. Not romantic ones, but intimate in a different way. Secretive, coded, full of shared schemes and whispered deals. She recognized the name from the news, Ethan's co-conspirator, now under investigation. Each word she read felt like a splinter driven beneath her skin. Her hands trembled. She shut the laptop, pressing her palms to her eyes, trying to breathe. For years, she had built her marriage around faith, believing that loyalty could soften deceit, that love could cover what logic refused to see. But here, in the glow of the screen, all her vows turned to ashes. When Oliver knocked that afternoon, she didn't answer at first. He waited, quiet, patient. Eventually, she opened the door. Her eyes were red, her voice brittle. "Come in," she said. He studied her for a moment before stepping inside. The air between them carried a heavy silence, filled with unspoken things. "You found something," he said softly. Clara nodded, motioning toward the desk. "He used me, my signature, my business contacts, everything. He wrote to investors, pretending to be me." Her voice cracked. "He made me part of it, Oliver, even if I didn't know." Oliver's expression darkened. "That's not on you." She shook her head. "But it is. I was there beside him, smiling at galas, showing up in magazines as the perfect couple. I helped him build this image that fooled everyone, including me." Oliver didn't speak. Instead, he crossed to the window, hands slipping into his pockets. The city stretched below them, distant, indifferent. "You believed in him," he said finally. "That's not a crime." "It feels like one," she whispered. He turned to her, his gaze softer now. "Clara, guilt isn't proof of wrongdoing. It's proof of conscience." She looked at him, wanting to believe, but the words barely held. There was a fragility to her posture, the kind that made him want to reach out, but he didn't. He'd learned, through his own ruin, that sometimes comfort could hurt more than silence. She sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers fidgeting with the sleeve of her sweater. "Why are you still here, Oliver? You did your job. You uncovered the truth. You could have walked away." He hesitated, as though weighing the cost of honesty. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything for the sake of the truth." Her eyes lifted slowly. "You said something like that before. What happened to you?" For a long time, he didn't answer. The sound of the rain returned, soft, rhythmic, patient. Then, quietly, he said, "Her name was Laura." Clara didn't speak. "She was my wife," he continued. "I was working on a story about corporate corruption. The company she worked for was involved. I didn't know she was part of it until it was too late. When the article came out, she lost her job, and the press came for her like wolves. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that truth mattered more than consequence. But in the end, it destroyed her. She couldn't handle it." He stopped, his voice fraying at the edges. Clara's breath caught. She could hear what he didn't say, the unspoken ending that hung like smoke between them. "She's gone," Clara said softly. He nodded once. 3 years now. The silence that followed was tender and terrible. It was the kind that didn't need words, only presence. Clara stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. The city lights painted his face in pale gold. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Oliver turned his hand, lacing his fingers gently with hers. "Don't be. I made my choices, and you—" He looked at her, really looked. "You're still standing in the wreckage, trying to find something worth saving. That takes more courage than I ever had." The honesty in his voice broke something inside her. For the first time in weeks, She felt seen not as a victim, not as a headline, but as a person who had lost something real. They stood like that for a long moment, two broken souls tethered by the quiet understanding of loss. Later, as evening descended, they shared a meal in silence, simple soup and bread, eaten more for comfort than hunger. The candlelight flickered between them, casting long shadows on the glass walls. "You know," Clara said, her voice thoughtful, "I used to believe vows meant forever, that if you said them loud enough, the universe would listen." Oliver looked at her. "And now?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Now I think vows only mean as much as the person who makes them. Ethan's broke. But maybe that doesn't mean mine have to." He studied her face, the quiet strength rising behind her grief. "You still believe in love," he said. "I want to," she admitted, "even if it hurts." Oliver nodded, his eyes soft with something she couldn't name. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us." The words lingered, fragile but sincere, like a promise not yet spoken aloud. Outside, the mist deepened, wrapping the city in silver. Inside, their reflection shimmered faintly in the glass walls. Two people standing among ruins, bound not by what they'd lost, but by the possibility of healing. And as the night stretched on, Clara realized that the echoes of her broken vow were slowly giving way not to silence, but to something gentler, something that might one day sound like forgiveness. The day of the trial began in silence. Seattle's sky was a sheet of muted gray, heavy and watchful, as if the world itself held its breath. Clara stood before the mirror in her apartment, fastening the last button of her white blouse. Her reflection looked foreign, too pale, too composed, like a stranger wearing her skin. The faint tremor in her hands betrayed what her face refused to show. The courthouse loomed downtown, all glass and steel and cold authority. Each step she took toward its doors felt like a descent into something final. Oliver was waiting by the curb when the car arrived, his posture tense beneath his dark coat. He didn't speak at first. He simply opened the door for her, his eyes searching hers. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. Clara tried to smile, but it came out thin and tired. "I think I do." Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and anxiety. The echo of heels and murmurs filled the marble corridor as reporters lingered near the entrance, hoping for a glimpse of the disgraced CEO's wife. Cameras flashed as she passed, but she kept her gaze straight ahead, her chin lifted slightly in defiance. The courtroom itself was smaller than she imagined, intimate, almost claustrophobic. Rows of benches filled with journalists and strangers, their curiosity palpable. At the front, Ethan sat beside his lawyer. He turned when she entered. Their eyes met, and time seemed to hesitate. He looked thinner, paler. The charm that once cloaked him had vanished, leaving something hollow and frightened behind. For a fleeting moment, she saw not the man who had betrayed her, but the man she had once loved, the man who brought her flowers every Sunday morning and kissed her hair as if it were made of glass. That memory, once so tender, now felt like a cruel trick of the light. When she took her seat, Oliver's gaze found hers from the back row. He gave a small nod, a silent reassurance, but it did little to still the storm inside her chest. The proceedings began, formal and unyielding. Lawyers spoke in sharp, detached tones. Evidence was presented. Witnesses called. Her name came up again and again, her company, her signature, her unwitting role in Ethan's deception. Each mention was like a cut reopened. Then came the call. "Mrs. Clara Hayes, please take the stand." She rose slowly. The sound of her heels on the floor was deafening in the hush. The oath was administered. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" And her voice, though trembling, answered yes. The prosecutor began gently, perhaps aware of the eyes watching her every expression. Questions unfolded one by one about her company, her involvement, her knowledge or lack thereof. And then came the moment she dreaded. "Mrs. Hayes, did your husband ever inform you that he was transferring funds under your business name?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. Ethan looked at her, then pleading, desperate, a faint shake of his head barely visible. His eyes said, "Don't." She hesitated. For a second, she could almost hear his voice, the familiar warmth of it. "Clara, we'll fix this. Just trust me." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. Then she thought of the night she spent staring at the ceiling, the news headlines with her name beside his crimes, the pitying glances from friends who no longer called. She thought of the version of herself who believed in him so completely that she forgot to believe in her own instincts. And she thought of Oliver, his quiet strength, his relentless insistence that truth, however brutal, was the only way out. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear. "Yes," she said, "he told me, and I trusted him. I didn't know what he was doing with those accounts, but I signed what he asked me to sign. I wanted to believe he was telling the truth." The prosecutor nodded. "And when did you realize he wasn't?" Clara met Ethan's gaze across the room. "When it was too late." A murmur rippled through the court. Ethan looked away, his face hardening into something unreadable. The defense attorney tried to object, but the damage was done. Question after question followed, each one peeling back another layer of her life, her role in the company, her marriage, her silence. She answered all of them. Every word cost her something. When she stepped down from the stand, she felt drained, emptied out. The weight of truth was heavier than she had imagined, but it was clean too, honest. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed again. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, questions blurred into noise. Oliver was there, moving through the chaos to reach her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. "You did it," he said quietly. Her eyes were rimmed with tears, but her smile this time was real, fragile as it was. "I told the truth." "You did the right thing." Clara exhaled shakily. "It doesn't feel right. It just feels empty." Oliver's gaze softened. "That's how it feels at first. The silence after the fall always does, but it's where rebuilding starts." They walked to the car together. Rain had begun to fall again, thin and persistent, dotting the pavement with tiny, perfect circles. Clara watched them through the window as they drove, her mind drifting. She thought of the years she'd spent building a life around Ethan, around their shared dreams, their shared deceit. Now there was only the sound of rain, the hum of the engine, and Oliver beside her, his presence quiet but steady. When they reached her apartment, she didn't move to get out right away. The city lights shimmered against the wet glass, turning everything outside into streaks of color. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Telling the truth, no matter the cost?" Oliver looked at her for a long time before answering. "Every day, and yet, it's the only thing that's ever set me free." Clara nodded, her eyes distant. "Maybe that's what this is. Freedom, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "It will." For a moment they sat in silence, the world outside blurred and distant. Then Clara turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Oliver, for staying." He gave a faint, sad smile. "You don't thank someone for caring, Clara. You just let them." The rain fell harder, drumming against the car roof, steady and relentless. And somewhere in that sound, in the space between guilt and grace, Clara realized that truth, for all its cruelty, had finally given her something Ethan never could, the chance to begin again. The verdict came 3 weeks later, delivered in a courtroom so still it seemed even the air was waiting to breathe. Ethan Hayes was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The words fell heavy, echoing in the silence that followed, and though Clara had known what the outcome would be, the sound of the judge's voice struck her chest like a blow. She didn't cry. She had no tears left. She just sat there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, feeling the strange emptiness that comes after a long storm. When Ethan turned to look at her one last time, there was no anger in his eyes, only the quiet recognition of what he had done. For a brief, aching moment, she almost pitied him. Then he was led away, and the door closed behind him with a finality that echoed louder than the gavel. By the time Clara stepped outside, the afternoon sky was pale and cloudless, indifferent to the wreckage of two lives. Reporters shouted her name, cameras clicked, but their questions blurred into meaningless noise. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She just walked. That night, she packed a single suitcase. Oliver called several times, each one going to voicemail. He left a message, his voice low, hesitant. "Clara, I know today must have been unbearable, but please, don't disappear. You don't have to face this alone." She listened once, then deleted it. She couldn't bear the sound of comfort not yet. She needed silence, something untouched by pity or empathy or the constant hum of the city that had watched her fall. At dawn, she left Seattle behind. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, bordered by fields and fog. She drove for hours without music, without thought, her mind drifting between memories and nothingness. The further she went, the lighter she felt, not from peace, but from exhaustion, as if she were dissolving slowly into the road itself. By evening, she found herself in a small coastal town north of Portland, a place that smelled of salt and rain and forgotten summers. She rented a cottage near the water, its paint chipped and windows drafty, but it was quiet. No reporters, no flashing lights, no echoes of Ethan's voice. Only the sea. Her days fell into a rhythm. She walked the beach at sunrise, her feet sinking into the cool sand. She cooked simple meals. She read old books and sometimes wrote in a worn journal, though most pages remained blank. The silence at first was unbearable, too wide, too full of ghosts, but slowly it began to settle around her like a balm. She thought often of Oliver. She remembered the way he had stood in the courtroom, quietly watching, his face unreadable, but his eyes full of something unspoken. The way he had looked at her, not as the woman entangled in scandal, not as a name in headlines, but simply as Clara. Sometimes she would imagine him walking into the cottage, still smelling faintly of rain and coffee, saying her name in that careful way he did, as if it might break if spoken too loudly. The thought both comforted and hurt her. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Oliver was unraveling. He told himself he was respecting her space, that she needed time. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized what had really kept him away. Fear. He had lost before he knew the taste of grief too well. And somewhere deep down, he feared that if he found her, if he reached out, she might vanish all over again. Still, he couldn't stay still. One night, he found himself driving past her old apartment. The windows were dark, the rooms empty. Her plants were gone. The place looked stripped of life, as if it, too, were waiting for her to return. He went to the courthouse, the coffee shop she used to frequent, the waterfront, where she once said she liked to clear her head, but she was nowhere. Each failed search deepened the hollow inside him until the city itself began to feel like a cage. It wasn't until nearly a month later that he found a clue. A postcard arrived at his apartment. No return address, no message, only a picture of the Oregon coast. On the back, in her handwriting, were two words: "Still breathing." He read it again and again, his thumb brushing the ink. Relief mixed with something heavier, longing, regret, the quiet ache of someone realizing too late how much a person had come to mean. He thought of her laughter, rare but real, the way she used to tilt her head when she listened. The night she reached out and held his hand in silence, needing no words between them. He had told himself he was helping her heal, guiding her toward truth. But somewhere along the way, without meaning to, he had fallen into the space her pain had left behind. And now, she was gone, out there somewhere between sea and sky, and he could only stand at the edge of her absence. That night, Oliver sat by his window, the city lights flickering below. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but it didn't warm him. He thought about calling her, about tracing the postmark to find her, but he stopped. He remembered her face in court, pale, composed, resolute, the look of a woman who had finally chosen herself after years of living in someone else's shadow. Maybe she didn't need saving anymore. Maybe that was the point. Still, the ache wouldn't leave. He closed his eyes and could almost hear the ocean, the hush and pull of the tide, the endless rhythm that asked nothing and gave everything. Somewhere out there, she was standing on a beach, watching the same horizon, breathing the same air. That thought was both agony and solace. Clara, meanwhile, had begun to find small fragments of peace. One morning, she stood on the shore, the wind tugging at her hair. The waves broke softly at her feet, and she let the water wash over her toes until they numbed. For the first time in years, she felt light, not because she had forgotten, but because she had stopped running from what hurt. She whispered his name once, Oliver, just to hear how it sounded against the wind. It disappeared almost instantly, carried away across the sea. She smiled, faintly. In the ruins of love, she had found something fragile and rare, the quiet certainty that even after devastation, the heart could still choose to live. Back in Seattle, Oliver held the postcard one last time before slipping it into his notebook. He looked out at the gray dawn and murmured to no one in particular, still breathing. It wasn't goodbye, not yet. Just a pause, a silent stretch between two people, learning how to exist after the fire. And in that silence, love lingered, not burning, not bright, but steady, waiting. The winter along the Oregon coast was quiet, almost reverent. Mornings came slowly, with fog that clung to the dunes and waves that whispered against the shore, as if afraid to break the silence. Clara had grown used to that hush, the way it wrapped around her little cottage, soft and steady, a reminder that the world could still hold stillness even after it had broken you. She woke most days before sunrise now, not because she couldn't sleep, but because she wanted to feel the day arrive. She'd light the kettle, listen to it hum, and watch through the kitchen window as the horizon turned from black to pearl gray to gold. It had become her quiet ritual, a fragile piece she built one morning at a time. This morning felt no different at first. The clock on the wall read 4:58. The air smelled faintly of salt and pine. She pulled her cardigan tighter, waiting for the kettle to sing. Then came the sound, a knock. 3 soft raps at the door. Her breath caught. No one ever knocked here. Not at this hour. Not at all. The last time she'd heard that sound at 5 a.m., her entire world had shifted beneath her feet. She stood still for a long moment, her heartbeat echoing in the quiet kitchen. The kettle began to whistle faintly behind her, steam curling up like a ghost of another morning. Slowly, she moved to the door. When she opened it, the fog was thick and silver, and in its midst stood Oliver. He looked different maybe, though only a few months had passed. His hair was longer, his coat dusted with mist. He was holding nothing, no suitcase, no explanation, just his presence, solid and trembling at the same time. "Hi," he said quietly. His voice was rough, sleep-worn, but it carried the same calm she remembered. Clara gripped the edge of the door, unsure whether to step forward or close it again. "You found me," she whispered. He nodded. "Took a while." "How did you?" "The postcard," he said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "I followed the coastline. Figured you'd choose somewhere the sea could listen." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fog pressed close, and the sea murmured somewhere beyond the dunes. She wanted to ask him why he'd come, but she already knew. The question was written all over his face, in the exhaustion in his eyes, in the way he stood as if unsure whether to ask for forgiveness or simply a place to rest. "Can I come in?" he asked at last. Clara hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. The door closed softly behind him, and suddenly he was there, inside her quiet world, the scent of the ocean and the faint smell of his cologne filling the small kitchen. The kettle had begun to shriek. She turned it off, poured 2 cups of tea without dama, asking if he wanted any. It was instinct, as natural as breathing. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table, the steam from their cups rising between them. For a while, the only sound was the soft hiss of the sea wind slipping through the window panes. "You disappeared," Oliver said finally, not accusing, just stating a truth. "I had to," she replied. "Everything in that city felt poisoned. I needed to remember who I was before all of it." He nodded slowly. "And did you?" Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the faintest light of dawn began to touch the waves. "I think I'm still remembering. Some days I feel like myself again. Other days I feel like I'm just surviving." She paused. "But that's better than feeling nothing." He leaned back, watching her. "I didn't come to pull you back," he said softly. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about you. About the way you looked that day in court, so certain, even when everything was falling apart. You made me believe that honesty doesn't have to ruin you. It can rebuild you." Clara looked down at her tea, her hands trembling slightly around the cup. "You rebuilt me, Oliver. You were there when no one else was, and that scared me more than anything." "Why?" "Because I started to need you. And after Ethan, I promised myself I'd never need anyone again." He exhaled, a small broken sound. "You don't have to need me. Just let me be here." The words hung between them, simple and heavy. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, she let herself really see him not as the man who uncovered her husband's lies, not as the journalist, not even as the savior she once resented. Just Oliver. A man standing in the wreckage of his own life, asking quietly to build something new. Outside, the sky was beginning to blush pink. Light spilled into the kitchen, soft and hesitant, like forgiveness. Clara stood, walked to the door, and opened it again. The cold air rushed in, smelling of sea and dawn. She turned back to him. "Come see, Gus," she said. He joined her at the doorway. Together, they watched the first edge of the sun rise above the horizon, the waves catching fire with light. "When you knocked that morning," she murmured, "I thought my life was ending." Oliver looked at her, his voice quiet. "Maybe it was, but maybe this is what comes after." She smiled faintly. "The afterlife?" "The afterlove," he said, a little awkwardly, but the truth of it made something inside her ache. They stood in silence for a long time, the dawn unfolding around them. Eventually Clara turned to him, her hand brushing against his. He didn't move, didn't speak, just let the touch settle between them like a fragile promise. "You could stay," she said softly. just for a while?" He looked at her, the corners of his eyes creasing with something that was both relief and disbelief. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've had enough of silence." The tension that had lived in his shoulders for months seemed to melt. He smiled, not the quick, guarded one she remembered, but something slow, warm, almost boyish. "Then I'll stay," he said. The morning grew brighter, filling the room with gold. Clara closed the door, the sound gentle this time, not an ending, not a warning, but the beginning of something uncertain and real. They sat again at the table, the fog lifting outside, the world quietly waking around them. Oliver reached for her hand, not demanding, just offering, and she let him. Their fingers intertwined, fitting in that small, wordless way that only happens when two people have walked through fire and come out still willing to feel. For the first time in a long while, Clara didn't think about what was lost. She thought about what was left. The sea outside glimmered under the new sun. Somewhere, a gull cried a sound sharp, alive, impossibly distant. And as the light spread across the water, Clara realized that love, even when born from ruin, could still be something beautiful. Not perfect, not pure, but real. The kind that grows quietly, like dawn after the longest night. Oliver squeezed her hand once, gently. "You remember what I said the first time I knocked?" he asked. She smiled, eyes glistening. "Don't go to work today." He nodded. "Guess it was good advice after all." Her laughter came softly unsteady but free, and in that fragile, luminous moment, as the sun finally broke through the fog, two people who had lost everything sat together in a small cottage by the sea, ready at last to begin again.